Welcome to video 2 of chapter 12, where we will look at peers in infancy and early childhood. And already in the first year of life, we can see that babies have an interest in their peers. Babies will babble at one another, they will smile at one another, and if they're close enough, they will even reach out to touch one another. So it just shows that, there's an interest very early in life. In the second year of life, toddlers interact by imitating each other. And by the time they get to about 20 to 24 months of age, just as they approach 2 years of age, it often becomes mutual imitation, just meaning that it's back and forth imitation. So the first toddler, jumps up and down, and so the second toddler jumps up and down, and then the first one, kind of copies them and jumps up and down again, and then the second one does it, and so it's just kind of a back and forth imitation. Um, if you see a couple of toddlers together, I mean, you can. This is often the case that they'll just keep copying each other. Uh, the toddlers that do well with social interactions and are more responsive to other toddlers and receive better and more positive responses back tends to be toddlers that have a secure attachment to their parents. So research shows that your early attachment pattern, secure versus an insecure attachment pattern, makes a big difference in early peer relations. Those that have secure attachments to their parents do better with their peers. And remember that first attachment that you have, kind of forms a mental model or a blueprint in your mind about what a good relationship is. And so it kind of helps pave the way for later relationships. Language development allows for more sophisticated play. And so once again, towards the end of the second year of life, as language has been developing, you start to see pretend play develop, which is also known as fantasy play. So using language and pretending that you're acting, I don't know, maybe pretending that you're different characters. I'm the doctor and you're the patient, or I'm the mother and you're the child. You also see conflicts over possessions. Remember, I talked about how children start using the word mine to claim things right around the second year of life. So this shows up in interaction with peers. They one child might go over and then claim a toy from another child and say, this is mine, and then they take it. And but it also, as it says here, it also becomes part of reciprocal interactions. You get some back and forth interactions where one child might take something from the second one, and so that second child goes and takes something from the first child, and so, like, it's a form of interaction, even if it is just claiming toys or something. As we get into the preschool years, you start to see some what we could actually call friendship formation, I guess, at this point. And it's friends during preschool years are basically those who like to play the same things you do. So they're basically play partners. Pretend play or fantasy play, as it says here, promotes sophisticated levels of accommodation and planning among peers, allows for expression of emotions important to the children. There's been research showing a lot of benefits of pretend or fantasy play, and the acting out of different types of social situations and whatnot. I mean, it really allows for a lot of emotional development, because I mean, you can they a young child can express emotions through their fantasy play or pretend play. Um, I'll return to this a little bit later and talk a little bit more about that. One thing that shows up sometimes is play disruption. It's not it's not a real common problem, but it can be a serious quite a serious problem. And play disruption just means when a child has an inability to play, because the child's emotions are preventing, the true expression of joy that's linked with the fun of play. So usually, if you ever come across a child that just seems incapable of playing because like their emotions are so messed up, I mean, it's usually an indicator that they may have some kind of developmental problem, um, or it may be a sign of issues in the home or things like, or something like that. So occasionally you may come across a child that just seems incapable of play, and it should not be overlooked, because you know every child should be able to get some enjoyment out of play. So it's very unusual when you come across one that just seems like they just can't let their emotions go. Emotions are so wrapped up tight, or that they just don't seem to be capable of having fun. So, okay, what is play? Well, I don't really need to add anything here. It's done for its own sake, not for any outside goal or purpose. I mean, you play because it's fun. Um, Even if it's an imitation of adult work, it's still done in a fun way. So like you might be pretending to do something that we would call work as adults, like I don't know, mowing the lawn or doing dishes or something like that. And but when it's done with as play, you get laughing and exaggeration activities and role reversals, or things like that. So there's a lot that differentiates it from true work, even though it's an imitation of work. Play is voluntary and spontaneous. Children are actively and fully involved in a private reality during play, specifically, or not specifically, but especially with pretend or fantasy play. And of course, play is fun. Yeah. Um, Play also is involved in physical development. There's three stages shown here. And when we talk about physical activity play, we're talking about play that involves large muscle activity. Um, and it starts in infancy with rhythmic types. And you can see this with infants, where they will repeat large muscle movements that have no purpose, but they seem to enjoy it. So, like a baby kicking its leg, up and down over and over while it's in its crib, just kind of move, kicking their leg up and down, or just waving their arm back and forth in the air. Um, Piaget talked about this, and he saw it as children or as infants, really learning to use their muscles, and they're forming action schemas on how to move their leg in a certain way or their arm in a certain way. But it's also at the same time, they definitely are enjoying themselves, and it's seen as a form of play, just waving their arm around, or they're kicking their leg around. Okay, so it's referred to as rhythmic stereotypies. Exercise play is something that you see a lot in toddlerhood, or I would say it begins in toddlerhood at least. And it begins in toddlerhood, and it peaks around age 4 or 5, and then declines. So from toddlerhood until like the end of preschool years. And what we mean by exercise play is just a child, you know, just doing a lot of jumping up and down, or just running, like where they're not really trying to get anywhere. They're just running around, and once again, you might get toddlers or preschoolers like imitating each other, and one will run somewhere and the other one will follow them, and where they both just start jumping up and down. Um, so it's known as exercise play because there's no rules, or there's no like winners or losers. It's just moving about in a fun way, running and jumping. Okay, and then you get rough and tumble play. Um, this is like shown in this picture here. You and this type of play increases in the early school years, and it's play that looks like fighting or wrestling, but the goal is to have fun. You can see these kids in this picture; they're all laughing, isn't it? Even though they're kind of, it looks like they're wrestling, in a sense. So once again, that increases in the early elementary school years. I'm sorry, these are just a few early physical activity stages of play. Um, Play can be important for emotional development, and it was really first noticed by Freud, and it's it was mentioned as part of his psychoanalytic theory that children may play out inner emotional conflicts. So during their play, Freud felt like children were sometimes just expressing or releasing their inner emotional conflicts. So a child engaged in pretend play, might be using a couple of dolls and and pretending one of them's a mother doll and one's a child doll, and maybe she's making the mother doll like yell at the child, and it may be because this child has experienced some emotional issues with her mother yelling at her, and so she may act it out in play as a way to kind of deal with and release her her inner emotional conflicts. And another example would be sometimes if a child has an emotional experience going to the doctors, maybe they got some shots and it was really scary and they cried, and it wouldn't be uncommon for them to come home and at some point act out a little pretend play with a doctor and a patient, and so that by acting it out, it allows them to kind of deal with the emotions that they were experiencing. Um, so that's that can be one important role of fantasy play, and as it says here, fantasy play is linked with more understanding of the emotions of self and others. So I mean, you are learning about emotions, and not only of dealing with your own, like in those examples I just gave, but also when you learn more about others' emotions because you take on other people's roles. Like you pretend to be you pretend that one doll's your mother, for instance, and you talk like from your mother's perspective. Um, and in order to do this, you have to engage in perspective taking. So like, what would my mother say to this? What would this mother doll say to this child doll? And like, so you have to kind of act out like this is what an adult's like, and you try to take their perspective, and or this is what a mother's like, or this is what a doctor's like, and during the pretend play, you have to kind of mentally try to put yourself in their shoes, and this is this helps you to kind of learn about how different people have different emotions, and um and it gives you maybe more of a sense of what others are experiencing, because because of researchers have found that play is linked with emotional development. um, Play therapy eventually developed, and somebody had the idea that, well, if children actually do express emotions during play, then maybe we can use this as a form of therapy. And so it's a way to help children, as it says here, work through difficult feelings with the help of an adult who is trained to understand play as a type of communication. It's most effective when parents are involved. And research has found that play therapy really does help children change maladaptive behaviors, and especially, and once again, especially if the parents are involved. Um, it sometimes a child can express something that's bothering them through play that they cannot simply put into words. And so that if the therapist plays with them, they can see what's inside the child and what the child's dealing with. And and having the parents involved, allows the parents to see some of the issues firsthand as well, and kind of learn about what the child might be expressing through their play, so they can learn to see certain signs when the child's upset, um, back at home. Play also can help with social development. I don't have too much to add here. Research has shown a link between the amount and nature of parent-child play and children's competence in social interactions with other children. I already said that those children that have secure attachments, they tend to do better with peer groups and with social interactions. But also, if a child has engaged in more communication in the early years at home, then they're more ready to communicate with others. And so it's not surprising then that if there's been a lot of parent-child play with which involves communication and turn taking and just um, interact back and forth interactions. I mean, the child learns how to interact with others by interacting with their parents during play. And once again, it kind of sets up a model. Early parent-child play, just kind of shows the child this is how it's done. And because the parent will point out if the child's like not being fair, or if the child is doing something wrong. I mean, like, the parent would point that out there in play, so that you kind of learn like how play works and what are the rules of play and things like that when you do it with your parents early in life. Um, okay, I'm going to go on here. Uh, Parton came up with these stages of social play, and there's 6 stages here. Each one a little bit more, interactive and sophisticated. So the first stage is unoccupied behavior, where the child is just basically looking around, but but not looking at any particular specific activity. This might be like an infant, at the beach with their parents, and the infant will look around at what's happening, but they're not following any like just one thing. They're just kind of gazing around, and so that's just called unoccupied behavior. It's not even really any kind of form of social play. It's kind of like before social play begins, but at least the child is maybe watching other children on and off. Onlooker behavior is specifically watching other children play. So you're watching a specific activity. So maybe there's a child that's building a sandcastle, and your child is intently kind of watching them. And then we move up to solitary independent play. This is playing on your own. So the first 2 levels were just about watching and looking around and watching things. Now we reach a level where the child's actually doing some play, but it is solitary. It's not social yet. We get to level 4. It's called parallel play, and this is where children will play next to each other, but not actually interact at all. So there may be 2 different children building sandcastles on the beach, and so they're not doing it together. They're just a little one may have saw the other one building a sand castle, so they go down and start building their own sand castle. But there's at this point with parallel play, it's not they're not actually sharing anything or interacting. Associative play takes it a little bit further now, and this is where children are playing next to each other, like in parallel play, but now they interact and maybe even share some of their toys. So they're each building sandcastle, and one says, "I like your sandcastle," and the other one says, "I like yours too." And one borrows the other one's pail, and the first one borrows the other one's shovel or whatever. And so they're each doing their own thing, but they're talking about it. And then finally you get to cooperative play. So now this is where children play with a common goal. And so, you continuing with that beach example, now the two children are decide to work on one sandcastle together. So they're doing it together and helping each other. So they have one common goal. Or you have two kids like doing a puzzle together, you know, where they're working on the same kind of thing, the same goal. Okay. Just going back to, I actually want to make a note about one thing. Oh, actually, two notes. Okay, sorry. One note is that as a child progresses through these stages from being like an infant to an unoccupied behavior or just onlooking behavior to a toddler that starts, playing around others and eventually um, engaging in cooperative play. I mean, as a even though like each one's a little bit more advanced, um, as they move through these stages, it's not like they don't ever backtrack to an earlier stage. So a child may reach the level of cooperative play where they sometimes play with others, but then they may choose at times to just do solitary plays, and so it's not like you leave every stage behind. You just because you reach cooperative or associative play doesn't mean you don't go back to solitary or parallel play. I mean, the research actually shows that children will kind of go back and forth to different levels. Um, and some children just prefer solitary play. So they may reach a stage where they're mature enough to engage in cooperative play with others. But when a child prefers to play alone rather than with others, there's a number of reasons that they may decide to do that. Some of them could be problematic, but others are not. So, like, just as an example, if like I was saying, if the child just prefers to play alone, maybe, and they're doing some form of imaginative play, like using dolls or blocks or something like that. This is considered very healthy. Um, you know, they're engaging in sophisticated level of play and maybe acting things out, doing their own pretend play. Some children just like control. They don't. They want to do it on their own because they get to control the action. They get to control what the dolls are saying, or they get to control what they're building with the blocks all on their own, and they want to or if they're building a sandcastle. Um, that would be considered healthy. There's nothing wrong with solitary play if it's by the child's choice. When it's problematic, solitary play is if it's happening because the child's just too shy or too anxious um, with others, and this is why they're playing alone. If the child actually wants to play with others, but they just they have a social block where they're too shy or anxious. I mean, like then that would be considered problematic. That's something you'd want to help get the child past. Um, okay. By the age of 3, children begin to show preferences for specific playmates. Friendship, Friendships begin to develop. It's really around 3 that we get anything that you would call like ongoing friendships. But once again, it's mainly just centers around that they like certain activities in common. Um, and so they keep wanting to see the same friend because they know that they like to play the same games they do. But you do get like children wanting to repeat um, play dates with the same people beginning at 3. So these are real friendships. Um, okay, let's keep going. Um, so there's been issues about whether we should have things like recess at school in early grades, and like does it take away from learning if children are going to be spending part of the day just playing, and like what should we focus on in preschool or in kindergarten? I mean, like should how much of the time should be devoted to play and how much to learning, and what you know educators try to stress is that we shouldn't think of it as play versus learning time. What we should do is try to combine the two, and which makes a lot of sense, and make learning fun. I know that's not always going to be the case, but if it's done right in the certainly in the early years, um, learning can be fun, and there are ways to make it fun, and this is kind of one of the things that they've tried to stress is that we shouldn't be choosing between the two. We should be combining the two and combine learning and play. And this kind of fits in with Piaget's idea of discovery learning. Um, he was a big believer that children could, if they just followed their interests, that they would discover knowledge on their own. And so discovery learning is following his ideas of children learning on their own without direct involvement from a teacher. And this really shows up, for instance, at Montessori schools, where children often get to choose activities that they're interested in. They have a number of different things that they can engage in or play with, and but they try to make these various activities or toys, educationally based, and so as the child follows their own interest, I mean, that they will continue to learn about the subject that they're interested in. So one child might constantly be looking at the books that the school has on dinosaurs, and there might be a dinosaur collection, and he keeps learning about them. Well, he's learning, like even for him, it's fun because he's so interested. And another child, is learning all about the planets and about space, and because that's where their interest is. And so Piaget believed that when a child follows their interest, they want to learn. They will like seek out knowledge and try to learn things on their own. And so we have this idea has been we've tried to incorporate it into certain school systems, and it matches like the idea of the educators saying that we should combine play and learning. Piaget had uh, 4 levels of play that he talks about in his writings, and each one is a little bit more sophisticated in a cognitive level. So earlier we were looking at these were like social levels of play. Each one was a little bit more social. In this one, it's about each one involves a little bit more thinking and cognition. And so practice play, this is something that begins in his first stage, sensory motor stage, which is like the first 2 years of life. And this practice play is just repeating a behavior over and over for fun. So I talked about this earlier in different sections. Like, a toddler that's just jumping up and down or jumping over a puddle back again and again, or just running around, or in infancy, that baby that's just kicking its leg up and down. I mean, Piaget would call any of those examples practice play. They're just learning to move about and use their muscles in certain ways. Constructive play. So it obviously doesn't involve a lot of cognition at first level. Constructive play now involves some thinking because you're building something. So an example is, these children with blocks. Actually, I think all these pictures here we could say are examples of some form of constructive play. And so you're basically you're building something. So prime example is using blocks and like building a castle or something. But obviously, you have to have some imagination when you're building something with up from blocks. Um, then we have symbolic or social dramatic play. This is we start seeing this with older toddlers or preschoolers. So this is during his second stage, pre-operational stage, and in symbolic play, you're pretending that one thing is another thing. So one thing symbolizes another. So a child might be pretend that a toy is a real phone, and they pick it up and put up to the ear and pretend to talk to somebody, and so they're symbolizing something in real life with a toy, or they might put a blanket or a sheet over some chairs and pretend that they've made a fort or a castle, like and go inside. Okay, that's symbolic. In social dramatic play is when you're doing it with others. Okay, so it can be symbolic just on your own, but social dramatic, when you add that element in it, you're doing pretend play with others. Now, not only are you symbolizing things and pretending one thing's another, but you're also engaging in that social aspect of play, and where you know where you're learning communication skills and then with other children. Oh yeah, anyways, but that's certainly this symbolic or social dramatic play is certainly more cognitively advanced. You're imagining things. You have to think about what people say when you do pretend play. Like if you're pretending to be a doctor and the other one's a patient, and you do perspective taking. And finally, games with rules, it comes a little bit later. This is during the concrete operation stage, his third stage, the third stage of Piaget's theory. And this is in the elementary school years. You really don't see a lot of games with rules in preschool years. And if you do, they're so basic, such basic simple games. But you really see a lot more in the elementary school years. All of a sudden, children start playing sports, which have rules, and you have to follow the rules, and they start playing board games a lot more in elementary school years, and you have to learn the rules of the board games. So this is certainly a higher cognitive standard, which is why the preschoolers don't do it a lot, because rules can be very complicated for many board games or even for certain sports. So anyways, these are four different types of play that each one is a little bit more cognitively advanced. And finally, I want to mention this. Barzak is a woman who um, believe, believes that play should be every child's right. And so she was responsible for developing a program called Playgrounds, Boundless Playgrounds. And this company or this program that she started, they create playgrounds that are accessible to all children. So, I mean, I don't know her personal experience, like if she had a child herself or if she just observed children that couldn't play in playgrounds, but she got the idea that we should make playgrounds accessible to everyone, whether children are disabled or in any way, that it's children's every right, she said, to be able to play. So this was just a fantastic idea that somebody had, and you see a lot more of these universal playgrounds around now that are accessible to children with different disabilities. And that will conclude this section on uh, preschoolers and and peer, I guess, peer relations in infancy and early childhood. Okay.